Hi, I'm Renaud. I'm here to kind of change a bit, do something a bit lighter, I guess. And I'm going to talk about the grid. And obviously by the grid, I mean Tron's grid. No, this grid. We all know which grid I'm going to talk about. So it's not going to be about software development, about iOS, about Apple platforms. Why am I giving this talk really? Well, it's because for the past 5 years, since COVID really, I've gotten pretty passionate about what we call the energy transition. Before that, I really didn't care about that, right? I just paid my electricity bills, I turned on the lights, I didn't care where it was coming from, I just cared that it came in and I just used it. But I didn't really understand really how things worked or whether it mattered or how things would change. I've gotten pretty tired, like most of you, I'm sure, of the political soundbites and the lack of concrete data. I love data. I love being shown the past, the present, the future, and I feel that in the media nowadays we lack that. We just learn about net zero and some targets, but we don't explain to people where we are and where we are going. And yeah, that's kind of why I'm giving that talk. Also, my wife can't take it anymore. I mean, I'm like talking to her and she's nodding, but she's not listening to me. So I figured the CocoaHeads audience would be a good audience for that, because you guys are curious minds and probably interested in that kind of topic and expand your horizons. Some disclaimers before I really get into it. I am obviously not a grid engineer, so I will definitely oversimplify a lot. And I might be mistaken. I mean, there's only so much I can learn by myself without making some mistakes. So please feel free to correct me if I'm mistaken, but I am not, this is not my job, and I'm trying to learn from whatever resources I have at my disposition. I am fiercely pro-renewables. Maybe some of my slides will come out as like, oh, I'm against it. No, I'm definitely pro-renewables, but obviously renewables comes with a set of challenges, and we have to be realistic about it. So don't misunderstand me. I'm also very happy to share my knowledge of solar systems. I mean, that's what I'm geeking about these days. I've got a solar setup at home. I just got a battery. It's amazing. So if you're thinking about putting a solar system on your home or your apartment or whatever, please talk to me. I'm really happy to talk about it. This is awesome. Anyway, let's start. So first of all, let's have an appreciation for electricity, really. And electromagnetism as a general thing, really, because that's what it is about. But this is a reason, really, why we live in an amazing city and we don't live like this, right? This is what living in cities used to be like a century ago, where you had smokestacks everywhere, burning coal right in the middle of the city, and there would be smog, it would be awful, and people would die. And that is actually, some photos are just like paintings, but you can see it, right? These are actual pictures taken then. This was the life before we actually mastered electricity and made it work for us in a way that's amazing. The fact that there's this force of nature that we can harvest, transport, and use in a clean way is just fantastic. I mean, if it didn't exist, we couldn't have the life we have. So appreciation for electricity in the first place. But let's define what is a grid. I mean, you've heard the term and probably you have some idea of what it is, but let's define it together, shall we? So a grid could be said that it's an interconnected set of electrical equipment, right? It's really literally the power lines that you see outside, the power outlets you have here, so power plants. Everything in an electrical grid is connected together, from the power plant all the way to the power outlet that I see right here. Everything is connected, everything is running together. It is obviously running with alternating current, right? We're pretty familiar with that from high school electrical things. With a set frequency, usually 50 or 60 hertz. In Australia, it's 50 hertz. And the thing that's amazing about that is that if you think about it, there's obviously a current that's alternating. That current is exactly the same everywhere in the grid at any point in time. I mean, plus or minus the speed of light, but let's imagine it's not significant in that case. So the actual voltage that you see outside of that power outlet right here is going to be exactly at the same time the same voltage you see all the way, let's say in Cairns, all the way in Queensland, because that's how the grid works. Everything is completely synchronized together everywhere that is connected with. Which is a pretty mind-blowing thing to just think about. There's obviously with electricity, we need to have a perfectly balanced supply and demand. That's really actually important and actually problematic, right? There's no way electrons can just bunch up waiting to be consumed. They arrive, they need to be consumed. If they don't, bad things and very bad things happen. And I want to paraphrase one of my favorite YouTuber that I recommend highly, which is called Technology Connections. But he had this quote lately that said, "The grid is the biggest, most complex, continuously running machine humans have ever built. It is on a scale unlike any other, and it is probably more complex than the space shuttle or anything we have ever done. And we don't even think about it because we just turn on the lights, we just boil our water, and we just assume that it just happens. And yes, it should just happen, but again, it's an appreciation towards the fact that we have built this thing and we need to care about it, right? So, and also we are not, I think it's another quote that I didn't put in, but we are basically like 2 days away from complete societal collapse, right? If ever the grid collapses and we don't have electricity, everybody says like, you just need 48 hours for society to collapse. So it's really important that we get power everywhere. I don't want to be a bit gloomy, but it's really important. So lots of very smart people, important people work on it to make sure that the grid works. Let's talk about some famous grids, right? So in the United States, for example, there's 3 main grids. There's a Western grid, the Eastern grid. So in the middle of the country, there are literally no connections, right? The power lines stop, and then you go to another grid. And obviously there's Texas that does things their own way because they didn't want to be part. I mean, there's political reasons for that, but also like that was a big problem a few years ago when they have that big cold snap, and they didn't have enough power to power everything, right? And they couldn't be helped by the rest of the country because they were not connected to the rest of the country. So they had to deal with whatever problems they had and could not receive power from the rest of the country. So yeah, that's United States, for example. Europe looks like this. There's a few grids, the main one being the continental Europe, as you would say, right? France, Spain, Germany, all of that. And interestingly, just recently, like a year or two ago, I believe Ukraine actually connected to the European grid. So it disconnected from the Russian grid, and now you could consider Ukraine being part of that blue thing. So yeah, pretty big in scale, as you can see, right? Another one that's pretty famous for anybody that's been in Japan is a Japanese grid, which is really interesting, where the north of the country runs at 50 hertz, the south of the country runs at 60 hertz, and in the middle, depending on where you are, it depends. But yeah, we have 2 separate grids, which is bananas, but that's how they've always done, and that's the reasons are historical. I'm not going to get into it, but yeah, like if you go to Japan, you will see in the hotel some warnings about make sure that you know what you're plugging into the outlet because you need to make sure that it accepts the frequency. The country doesn't decide that, it's where you are in the country. And I'm going to include that picture that's amazing that I've seen recently about a timer, a cooking timer in Japan, where you have to basically change how much you turn the little handle depending on which frequency you are on, because a lot of appliances, right, because the grid runs at 50 or 60 hertz, a lot of appliances use pulses of voltage as a source of time. They don't have any crystal or anything in there. They want to save money, right? So what they do is they just count the pulses of things, and therefore the time will run faster for them depending on if you're on a 50 hertz or a 60 hertz system. So that's just an amazing picture telling you how most of your appliances to this day work, right? Like they just count the pulses on the grid to count time, to figure out time. And then famous grid is ours, which is mostly going to be what I'm centering about for the rest of the talk, right? The Australian grid. And what I'm going to talk about is the Eastern grid, where we have Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, Victoria, and Tasmania connected together. West Australia is not connected with us because they're so far away, they have their own grid. I mean, there's no point in having a power line going all the way there. That makes sense. But yes, we are actually on the same grid as Tasmania. There is a power line going between us and Tasmania. It's a DC power line going down the Bass Strait, running 300 megawatts of power continuously. If somebody knows, I'd be really interested to know if Tasmania has the same phase as us, because the link is DC, so theoretically they can run with a different phase, but I could not find the thing. Anyways, if anybody knows, I'd be really interested to know. So yeah, let's do a surprise quiz, because who doesn't like that? So I just want to like quiz you about, electrical literacy, see what kind of room I have. So if anybody knows the answer or thinks they know the answer, please let me know and I'll move on. So let's say, how much power thereabouts does a kettle use when you boil water?
2 kilowatts.
2 kilowatts. 2 kilowatts. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, I would say 1800 watts, but 2 kilowatts is pretty good. Yeah, that's a kettle. How much energy does a typical Australian household use per day?
20 kilowatt hours?
Yeah, it's a pretty good estimate. I would say 30 kilowatts per hour, depending on the winter, summer, depending on the season. But yeah, I just want to introduce you to kind of units, right? We know the unit of power, which is a watt, and there's this notion of energy, which is stored, which is a quantity, right? So it's usually measured in watt hour, kilowatt hour, megawatt hour things, but the same way you have kilometers per second, and if you drive 50 kilometers per hour for an hour, you will have done 50 kilometers. If you consume 1 kilowatt of power for an hour, you will have consumed 1 kilowatt hour, right? So that's how these units work. What is a fair price for a kilowatt hour of energy in Australia right now?
25 cents.
25 cents, yeah, that's pretty good, yeah. 20 cents, I would say, I would say that's correct. Again, these are just estimates, right? So it's pretty good. What is the main kind of power plant in a NEM? So the NEM is a name for that Eastern Australian grid. Sorry, I didn't introduce the acronym before, but yeah, like what is the main?
Coal?
Exactly, yeah, it's coal. So you guys are pretty good about that. But so you're already pretty aware of the situation. And one last one, what is the current share of renewables in a NEM? Where are we at right now? 30. Anybody has a better number?
30.
We're exactly at 41.7%. And that's the thing that surprised a lot of people, right? They think that we are so far away from reaching, some kind of goal or whatever. Now we are already at 41.7%. We are doing so well. The bad news is this was the easy 40%. The next 40% are going to be way harder to achieve. But still, this is 41.7% of the grid that is not burning coal. And that's amazing, right? We already achieved that, and we can clap our hands, and we can be positive about it. And that's my frustration about the fact that why is nobody talking about that? Let's talk about our achievements and then also the future, but we need to think about where we are, and it's pretty darn good. So let's talk once again about the Australian market precisely. So how is the price of electricity decided? So let's talk about the NEM market, right? So how is the wholesale price of electricity decided? Because you as a customer have a fixed price that you pay to a retailer, usually, like you said, 20, 25 cents per kilowatt hour. But there's another market between the retailers and the generators that is completely variable. So that market is, first of all, regulated and operated by what's called the AEMO. AEMO, I don't know how to say it out loud, but let's go with AEMO. Australian Electricity Market Operator, I believe what it means, but that's the entity that controls all of that, right? That will decide the price for everybody. The market has been privatized since the end of the 90s. So apparently before that, I was not here in Australia, but the market was public. It was privatized because competition is supposed to bring the prices down. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. It's up to you to figure that out. But and like I said, yeah, you customers, you pay a fixed price. You're locked in a contract. You don't have to worry about the wholesale price. But the wholesale price obviously will impact your next contract. So you have to care kind of about the wholesale price. And the wholesale price is set basically every 30 minutes. It's set in tranches of 30 minutes. And there's a bidding auction going on between all the generators that want to provide and sell energy and the AEMO. So let's see how that works. Let's say we have a demand that is forecast by the AEMO, right? Like we forecast the demand for the next 30 minutes. And the forecast demand is 20 gigawatts to power the whole of Australian eastern border for the next 30 minutes. And we have a bunch of generators that are basically performing bids. And some of them are going to be, like a lot of it is going to be coal, let's say, that has a capacity of 12 gigawatt that says, okay, for every kilowatt hour I provide, I want to be paid 30 cents. Wind is cheaper because turbines, there's wind, they can basically run, but like there's wear and tear. So they're saying like, I want to be paid 10 cents for me to be worth running my wind turbine. Hydro says I want to be paid 50 cents because otherwise I would rather keep my water. Solar is super cheap because it says I got sun right now. I mean, literally there's no wear and tear. I can sell it super cheap, 5 cents, why not? And then there's another participant that's called, I would call it distillate. Distillate basically is a term for fuel, like literal petrol and mazout and diesel. There's actual generators on the grid that burn the stuff that you buy and put in your car. And these are super pricey because they're like, petrol is pricey, right? So like we can provide power. We can literally spin up a bunch of like really dirty, costly generators, but you got to pay us $15 for every kilowatt hour I generate. Outrageous prices, but yeah, they can do that. It's a bidding auction. So obviously, first, we go through the cheapest bidder. First of all, solar gets to satisfy some of the demand. Wind gets it. Then after that, hydro. Then after that, coal. And guess what? We have satisfied the demand. There's no all the other bids that are over that last bid didn't get to participate, and they can't turn on. They can't provide any electricity to the network. And the final price for that is going to be 30 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's really peculiar because the price that is paid to every single generator at this point is whatever the highest price has been bid. So even if you bid 5 cents, let's say for the solar farm, if somebody bid higher in that tranche, you will get 30 cents. It's really odd. I actually don't understand why. I'm not an economist, but why is everybody getting the highest price? There's probably a reason for it, but it's weird. But that's basically going to make sense when we go to the next example, where now demand has become 24 gigawatts, let's say, for the next 30 minutes. And again, solar gets the first bit, then wind, then hydro, then coal. But we're not there yet. I don't know, we can make calculation. We're still not there yet. So now distillate is getting to generate, and it can generate 1 kilowatt, it can generate 1 megawatt, it can generate 1 gigawatt. It doesn't matter. It is the highest bidder, it sets the price, and now the price that everyone gets paid is $15 per kilowatt hour. It is outrageous. And that is how wholesale prices work. And that is why when the demand is really high, if you look at the wholesale price, which you can find online, the prices go way up high. And that's because these few generators that use petrol to generate power determine the price for everyone. And we go from something costing, let's say, 20 cents per kilowatt hour to, I think there's an upper limit at $20 per kilowatt hour. So it's 2 orders of magnitude more. And these events, these moments when the grid has a high demand and distillate has to be burned, is basically what makes most of the price over the year, because it happens only a few times per year, but that is a huge increase for just a few hours during the year. It's bananas. But yeah, that's how the bidding works. This is obviously hyper simplified. The reality is way more complex, right? This is a Victoria power distribution network. You can imagine that there's changes depending on which power line you're behind, because there's going to be capacity restrictions behind every power line, where you are, where the demand is. The bidding system is way more complex, and actually the way it is done is through a set of constraints. Like if you're familiar with auto layout, you know about constraints and constraint solvers. That is exactly that. There is a giant constraint algorithm running where every power line is represented as a constraint, every generator is represented as a constraint, every demand, and they run a giant constraint solving algorithm, and out of that comes out who generates what power depending on all of these things. It's pretty amazing. I mean, I don't know the details, but that's how it works. All right, so another point, obviously, like I said, is balancing supply and demand. Once again, supply and demand needs to be very, very balanced. How do we balance the supply and demand? Because obviously, over 30 minutes, things will change, right? It will not stay flat at 30 minutes. First of all, the forecast might be wrong, but also things will shift over 30 minutes. The way to measure supply and demand is by looking at the frequency, right? So I said we are at 50 hertz. But if there is an over demand, that frequency will start to drop. And that's how everybody detects that, okay, we need to generate more. And likewise, if there's an oversupply, the frequency will start to ramp up once again. That is how everything is monitored. I can literally put, if I had one, I could put an oscilloscope in that PowerPoint right here and tell you the balance of supply and demand on the grid right now. If I just looked at the frequency that I could see on a sinusoidal wave, it's pretty amazing. That frequency must remain between 49.85 hertz and 50.15 hertz. So it's a 0.3% tolerance, right? It's very tight. It's 50 hertz is a very strong guarantee. If there's at any time the frequency goes over these limits, it's considered a grave incident. There's going to be an investigation, and there's going to be remediation because we don't want that to happen. Usually when that happens, nothing bad happens, but something bad could happen. So we want to rectify that. There's a side market, let's just quickly over that, that is just for frequency control, right? So you don't necessarily bid for that production, but you're just there to just correct frequency. So there's side markets, right? Not just a 30-minute bidding market, there's more. Let's talk about renewables now. Let's get into some pretty data because we love data. Here's the first graph, we love graphs. This is a typical day in an M. So I don't know if you guys have ever saw one of these graphs. This is the share of generation in M over a winter day. I took that graph a few days ago. Probably a pretty sunny day, actually, pretty nice day. So you can see yellow is, the light yellow is distributed PV. Basically, it's the solar systems on people's rooftops. And you can see it's pretty big these days. It is a fair, and we are in winter. Imagine that in the summer. It's getting big. It's becoming a juggernaut. It's becoming a monster. The darker yellow is just the solar farms. So basically, like, the solar farms you can see actually deployed. Green is wind. Then blue is hydro, right? All the power plants with the dams and all that. Black and brown is coal. So you can see there's still a lot of coal we're burning. And the reason why this graph goes below zero in the middle of the day is that we actually now we have batteries, right? And batteries charge during the day. So that's why it goes below zero. That's how it works in that case. And that dark blue edge in the morning and in the evening, that's a battery share that we have right now, where the batteries tend to charge during the day because there's plenty of power, plenty of sun, and they discharge in the morning and in the evening to help that demand that's really like bumpy. Something that's missing that I'm just like penciling in here is there's supposed to be more. See, right, like that curve is very predictable, it's very smooth, but certainly like it dips and all that. So what's going on here? That red line should really be the actual demand, because what's happening is that a lot of people, because they have rooftop solar, don't export to the grid, right? Like that light yellow thing is just an estimate, but there's a lot of electricity produced by rooftop solar that never makes it to the grid. They're just consumed by houses. And that's what this missing area is. It's just things that people consume directly from their home. Never makes it to the grid. So it's just interesting to see that there should be something here, but it disappears because it's already consumed by the houses. Anyway, so we see this graph and we say, okay, well, we're doing pretty well. So why don't we just build more? Build more solar farms, build more wind farms and all that, and then we'll be done, right? Like, just build more. Well, there's a few problems. First of all, the first problem, I'm not going to do too much over that because obviously we're not here for that, but it's political, right? There's special interests, there's misinformation, and there's not in my backyardism, if you don't know the term. But I won't go too much into that, but I will say that at least I believe that there is a cost to, for example, changing our landscape, right? If we change the coastline to have, let's say, wind farms everywhere that we can see from the coastline, we have forever changed that coastline. So I understand sometimes people having reluctance to having, at the very least, windmills in their neighborhood. We are changing nature profoundly when we install those. So preferably we install those in a way where we don't see them in the first place. Problem number two is obviously viability. So it ain't sunny all the time. I mean, look outside, not much sun right now, I would say. And it ain't windy all the time. So I think we're all pretty familiar with this problem. So what solutions do we have for that? Well, another obvious one is like we store the energy when it's sunny and windy, and we store it for when it's not sunny and not windy. So again, batteries, for example, that we just saw, is a great solution. They're going to be here. They're going to be able to store these electrons and then push them back once the sun goes to sleep. Okay. Oof. And another great solution would be offshore wind. So here's a map of Victoria. You can see that it's windy, kind of like a bit windy inside inland, but you can see the Bass Strait is really windy. Offshore wind is going to be a great baseload generation of wind. It's going to be. We have a lot of land in Australia. We have built a lot of wind farms inside Australia, but we are starting to build wind farms offshore because of that reason. Problem number 3 is distribution. I'm going to go back to that map. You can see it's very complex. And yeah, so one of the solutions is that we are building all of these solar farms, all of that, where the power plants are, so that we can reuse the same power lines, but we still need to build more power lines. There's only so much we can do with existing power lines. So a lot of the cost is not about the solar farms and wind farms and all that per se, it's about the distribution and the power lines. Problem number 4 is economical. I'm going to go back to that slide, and then I'm going to remove solar, because solar cannot be controlled, right? It's when it's sun. And then, can you see something in that graph? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? We all see it. It's a duck. Of course, it's a duck. Actually, no, it's called a duck curve. It's the actual term for it. It's a duck curve, and it's a problem that is created by solar panels, where the demand dips so much during the day nowadays, right? You can see over the years how much it dips and dips as people install rooftop solar or the solar farms coming on, that there's this curve that is dipping, and it's a huge problem because first of all, yeah, prices during the day now can go negative. Like the wholesale price of electricity can go negative. So yeah, awesome. We actually get paid to consume solar. Isn't that awesome? I mean, how? Why? Why is it? Who's paying the money in the first place? The problem is that the coal generators don't want to shut down, right? They have to stay powered on, because for them, shutting down and shutting on the boilers is hugely problematic. So they are willing to pay money to stay and to basically compete against solar to stay connected, so that they don't have to shut down. I don't know the reason exactly why. I just know they do. So the coal generators are paying people to consume electricity because they don't want to shut down. Problem is that also, so the main problem is that it disincentivizes investors, right? The name is a private market. If you have negative prices, but nobody wants to invest and generate this electricity in the first place, there's whiplash of prices, and generators will make it back in the evening anyway. So whatever you make during the day, the prices will go way up in the evening anyway, unless you have some leverage like a battery or anything like that. But really, like, you're not getting much out of it as a customer. The answer is kind of overall, but the answer is more storage, more competition, and maybe even public subsidies, right? Like, make sure that we make that transition and we help the market, because we cannot afford to let the market just figure it out by itself. Now, problem number 5, my favorite, is a 85% ceiling problem. So let's talk about inertia. So what is inertia? This is a turbine inside a power plant. This thing, as you may know, is like a gigantic spinning thing that spins at 3,000 RPM, right? Because we are running at 50 Hertz, that thing needs to spin at 3,000 RPM. This is tens of tons, if not hundreds of tons. And this has literal inertia, mechanical inertia, angular momentum, as you would say it. This is really important, because inertia is what provides an instantaneous response to supply and demand imbalances, right? So as there is an increased demand on the electrical network, that spinning giant turbine will actually instantly, continuously start slowing down, but also shed some energy toward generating more thing. And likewise, when the demand is, the supply is too big, that turbine will start speeding up and picking up that demand as well. It is really important. So it protects, it's very important to protect against unexpected events, like a power plant somewhere trips, or a smelter trips, or something like that. We need that inertia so that the grid continues operating at the same frequency. And if we don't have inertia, things can go really wrong. Renewable generators they're inverters, and they're electronic equipment. They don't provide any inertia. There's no spinning thing inside that solar farm. So that's a huge problem. They generate power, but they don't have any inertia. And the EMO requires a 15% floor on inertia. I'm not going to go through the units and all that. It's complex. But anything less than that, and it's too risky. We could run at 100% renewables nowadays. We could say, like, let it rip. Let's just have the solar farms power everything during the summer days. But if there's anything that goes wrong, we have a complete blackout. So we cannot do that right now, right? So what are the solutions to that problem? This. And you're going to say, like, that looks like a turbine, so what's the difference? Like, no, it's not a turbine. This is just like a flywheel. So what if we have a turbine, but without the power plant bit? What if we just have a giant flywheel that we call actually synchronous condensers, and all they do is they spin? Like, there's no generation, they just spin, and they just respond to these supply and demand imbalances. So anyway, we're building a lot of those nowadays everywhere in the world. Also, fast response batteries are good. Batteries are really good at responding to, like, against imbalances to the millisecond, right? But millisecond is still not good enough, but still, a battery is better than a coal boiler that takes a few minutes to actually ramp up. Gas generators are actually really good as well because gas can be turned on and off really quickly. That's why they say firm by gas, right? Renewables firm by gas. You can hear that term often in media. And then there's also this new technology called grid forming inverters. I'm not going to go too much into them. Anyway, I'm going to rush. Final graph. This is where we are. This is where we need to be in 2030 to reach our targets. So you can see we had nothing. I think this graph starts in 2010. We had nothing in 2010. We have a lot now, but there's still so much more to go. And these are kind of the projections that we have. So it's pretty good, but you can see how much there is still to go. So 41% is great, but there is a lot still to cover. And there's more demand as time goes on. And so this is what we need. Some cool websites, if you're interested, there's some blogs and some news sites that talk about these things in more details. Renew Economy is great, What Clarity, Nemlog. Some cool videos that if you're a geek, you will enjoy that, right? There's this playlist on YouTube from that guy that works on, a few years ago he did that. He worked on a little dam turbine that produces 50 kilowatts of energy, I think, and he's maintaining it, renovating it, turning it off and on, and he's showing everything inside it, including the moment when he turns it on and connects it to the grid, and he's like, I can't screw it up, because if I screw it up, the whole thing will tear itself apart. So I recommend seeing his videos because he shows a facet of engineering that I found fascinating. There's another video which is called the British Grid Kettle Response, which is a famous video from 15 years ago where there's a grid engineer that is watching the TV because he's waiting for the EastEnders, which is a TV show famous in Britain, you might be familiar with, to finish, because he knows that when the EastEnders finish, half of Britain is going to start making tea and turning on their kettles. And he's like, I'm going to fire up gigawatts of power right now. When the EastEnders film starts running, I'm going to... And anyway, so it's amazing because it's one guy in a control room where he has access to the whole grid. And he's like, kettles are going on. I need to fire up like all of these generators everywhere. Otherwise, the whole thing comes on. It's amazing. There's also an interesting Wikipedia and kind of like related stories. The 1965 US blackout, where I recommend you listening to the radio recording when that happens, because before there was a blackout for that moment, they're playing music, and the music slows down because the turntable functions with the frequency of the grid, and suddenly like it turns a bit slower, and the DJ notices like, hey, like, you know, like, oh, we're playing the song a bit slower nowadays. It doesn't have any idea that the grid is failing, like it's running at 45 hertz or whatever, but he's like, oh, for some reason that song is a bit slower these days. Amazing to listen to that recording because they have no idea that a blackout is happening. And then the best website is openelectricity.org.au. That's where I got my graphs. They have so much stuff, and I'm going to quickly just show you. I don't know if you see no, you don't see my desktop. So I may not be able to see it because we don't have time anyway. Go and see that website. If I give this talk, it's mostly to get you guys to look at that website. They have all the graphs about where we are, where we're going. They have a list of records. We are breaking records almost every single day in the market. And I love that they have that page that shows that, because it makes you, first of all, it makes me feel good, but it makes us feel like, no, that transition is happening right now, not later. And we are doing well. We still have so much more to do, but at the very least, we are reaching milestones almost daily. And we are right now in winter, so most of the records we are breaking are mostly about wind generation and battery discharge. When we get into spring and when we get into, oh, there you go. So we have a tracker, let's say you can look at oh, no, okay, that's you. Well, just look at records, for example, go in the records tab, if you can. There you go. And scroll down, you can see like all the records that the grid has broken. So right now, a lot of bioenergy stuff. But if you go down, you can see all the stuff, all the wind generation, because we're in the winter. And as you go down, you will see a lot of battery right now. We are installing so much battery in the grid. I mean, that's the best thing to do right now. And so a lot of records are being broken. And if you go and let's say...
We're going to wrap up, Renaud.
Yeah, okay. Just look at it. It's amazing to browse. It's going to make you feel good. So yeah, I recommend that website. It's amazing. All right. I'll let you...